welcome to the Dark Path podcast. I'm Luke Trottier, and today we're going to be talking with a friend of mine who has some knowledge and experience with the world of cryptocurrency, which I don't know a whole lot about, but I am very intrigued by, especially in terms of the bigger picture elements that this has in terms of ramifications for the economy and many other things. So without further ado, this is Justin Nearing, and Justin, please introduce yourself.
Hi, I'm Justin. I am a game developer by trade, but in the past couple months, I've really fallen down the rabbit hole that is crypto and all things digital currencies and all that good stuff. And I've just become absolutely somewhat obsessed with all the different rabbit holes that you can go through. There's a lot of exciting things going on in the space right now. And I think there's some fundamental shifts that this new kind of money, this new kind of exchange of value really allows for in context of how our society operates. So I'm super excited to be talking with you today and looking forward to it.
Yeah, that's great. I think for many people, including myself, it might be good to start at the beginning. I mean, a lot of times people don't really have a sense of what money is in general. So even the currency that they use every day, they don't think about where that comes from, how it exists. And so maybe you could talk about a little bit about that, but also then, of course, how that relates to cryptocurrency being a new form of value, as you said, which in itself is a fascinating thought. So yeah, can you sort of give us a basis of what's going on?
Yeah, it's a great question, and it's probably the best place to start is what is money? And it turns out that money is a couple things, but the most important thing I think is that it's a social construct. Money has value because we all agree that money has value. And the way that we ascribe that value to it is money has three things, or it needs three things to be considered money. One, it has to be a unit of account, which is a fancy way of saying the credit card statement that you get, the things that's listing, the money that's paid and owed, that's being listed in money. It is the unit of account for that credit card statement. The next thing it needs to be is a store of value. So they're not listing the number in grains of sand, because grains of sand has no monetary value. It has no value ascribed to it. So it has to be listed in something that has value. So we have a unit of account, we have a store of value. And the third thing is a medium of exchange. And what that means is basically they're not listing it in Picasso paintings. Picasso paintings have value. There's, you could list it as a credit card statement, but no one's going to exchange a Picasso for, a hamburger. So what we need is something that encapsulates all three of those things to be considered money. When you look at the monies of old, you look at like gold coins. Well, that satisfies that. You could list that as I have 5 gold coins. There's your unit of account. Gold obviously has value, and you could exchange that for goods and services. You probably still can today, although I don't know who's running around with gold coins in their pocket. Today we use fiat currencies, which is basically what the government says is legal tender for all debts, public and private, which means that the government says that this is the money and we all are participants within our government, whether we like it or not. Therefore, we all agree that this is the medium of exchange that we're going to use to pay our services. Really, that means that we can use it to pay our taxes. The government isn't going to accept your Picasso painting to pay your taxes. You're going to have to exchange that for US dollars or Canadian dollars or pesos, whatever currency that government is going to accept as this is the legal tender for this country.
Go ahead, keep going if you want.
Okay. Just wanted to pause. There's a lot you can say.
Yeah, what I've got for so far is the outline of what currency is in a general sense,
Yeah.
with a little bit about the current fiat currency. So yeah, now maybe when I think about cryptocurrencies, I see it being similar to a lot of the things that were created out of this thing that was brand new of 15 years ago called the internet, right? So up until that point, this wasn't even a possibility. And so I think, like so many of the other things that have emerged out of the internet, it's just so new that I think a lot of people have trouble conceptualizing its existence in the real world in that sense.
It's a great point because it only exists in a world where the internet exists. You don't have Bitcoin without, high-speed internet available, right? And the internet as a network, as a global network, needed to hit a certain critical mass in order for all these, goods and services that we enjoy today in order to exist. The thing is, though, is that the things that are in the digital space, there are valuable things that only exist in the digital space, right? And these can be all sorts of things. You can think of, like a pass to visit some community site, something that like a private community within that you can only get access to if you pay $100, right? That access has value. Obviously it's not real. It's not like you're going to download the piece of paper, and it doesn't work that way. But it's a way to say that the things that are on the internet, even though that they are in a digital context, do have value. What's interesting about cryptocurrencies is that it kind of takes that concept and it kind of shifts it a bit, where it's not this thing has value, it's a fungible thing of value. Now, fungible is a fancy word that means basically interchangeable. So if I take a $10 bill and I replace it with another $10 bill, even though those $10 bills are different, they're still $10. They're fungible. They're interchangeable.
Mm-hmm.
That pass to that community site is not really fungible. The Picasso painting is not fungible. If I replace one Picasso with another, people are like, no, that's not the same thing. So what a cryptocurrency is a fungible store of value, which means you can replace one Bitcoin with another Bitcoin and it's still one Bitcoin. It's not the Bitcoin that matters, it's how much of it that you have. It is very much as a money, where it doesn't matter if you have one $10 bill or another $10 bill. What matters is how many $10 bills you have.
Well, okay. So I've always looked at money as sort of a social lubricant for exchange. And I've recognized for a long time now that it's an abstract value. So it's a value that's placed into this whatever it is, because we need something that allows one person's time to be valuable enough to acquire the goods and services they need in their life in a general sense. Because as you know, I teach martial arts, and I certainly couldn't trade enough individuals for martial art lessons to get my shoes and my socks and my house and all that stuff. So I understand that. But as much as, again, I know how a lot of people don't even really understand how the current currency we have is created, I think it might be interesting and useful to try to explain a little bit about the nuts and bolts about how cryptocurrency comes into existence. And also, if you know or want to share or have the time, want to get into a bit of who conceptualized this initially and how they did that and brought it into the world.
Sure. So the first cryptocurrency is Bitcoin. It was released in 2008. Not great things were happening in the global economy in 2008. We call it the Great Financial Crisis for a reason. But basically, what it was is a anonymous person, or we don't know if it's a single male, female, a group of individuals, but an anonymous founder released something called the Bitcoin white paper.
We're talking about, and I didn't know this. But you were saying that it's anonymous who created Bitcoin initially. I didn't know that. That's really interesting.
Not anonymous, the
No,
organization.
no, I didn't mean that.
Yeah. Okay.
Okay.
Too many anonymouses.
You're right. And I got to be clear with I said that, but I just mean that there's no one who's taking credit for that initial.
Correct.
That's really wild.
Yeah.
But yeah, please go on. So in 2008, somehow this thing comes into play and from there.
Right. So they release a white paper that described a peer-to-peer digital cash. It wasn't the first time that this kind of internet money had been thought of. There had been previous experiments on it. One of the reasons that this person remained anonymous was those previous experiments had either failed or been subject to legal problems because the United States is very jealous that it has the money and it doesn't want potential rivals, real or imagined, right? So they decided to remain anonymous. The name they chose is Satoshi Nakamoto. So the author of the Bitcoin white paper is Satoshi Nakamoto. And what Bitcoin is essentially it solves a interesting set of problems in a really graceful way. So the big thing about cryptocurrencies in general is that there isn't a single source of truth. There isn't a single server that says, this is how much money there is, this is who is paying who, this is what all the transactions is. That is a really tough problem to solve. In order to solve it, they said, well, okay, if we don't want one single source of truth, because if you have a single source of truth, you have a single point of failure or a single point of corruption that says, no, today now you have, 0 of these things, and I have double of these things because I have access to the servers. If we don't want that, they decided, well, okay, what we'll do is we'll have everyone that is a participant in this experiment be one of the sources of truth. So basically, it's a decentralized ledger. Now, ledger is, like your credit card statement. It's a list of transactions within, a set of time. So what they have is a distributed ledger where everyone that has a Bitcoin node has a full copy of every transaction ever made in Bitcoin. These are super lightweight. They do a bunch of interesting things to make it so it's really small so that you can run it on computer hardware. You could run it on your laptop, for instance, if you wanted to. You could have a full Bitcoin node, and you could have the full history of Bitcoin and actively verify new transactions as they come in. This is important because it means that you can't just have one person decide, no, now you have 0 and I have double. Because that would be a big problem. This type of thing had been attempted before, but it failed because they didn't have a way to prevent someone from saying, because we're all anonymous in this network, right? I don't know who all the participants of Bitcoin are.
Right. Because the ledger is a shareable ledger, right? It's communicable, not communicable, but community based. That's really interesting. But yeah, keep going. But I got some thoughts on that.
Right. Yeah. So the big problem is, so one of the other things that Bitcoin solves really gracefully is there is a type of it's called a 51% attack. And so let's say that Bitcoin is super valuable, which it is now. But when you get something that hits a certain value, you're going to have an individual or group of individuals who want to try and acquire that Bitcoin through any means possible, even if it is nefarious. And so what this theoretical attack is if you have, so let's say that there are 20 participants in this Bitcoin node. So there's 20 individual copies. If you get 51% or more of everyone to agree to make a certain change to the history of Bitcoin, then that is what happens. Bitcoin is basically majority rules. If 51% or more of the network agrees that this transaction is valid, or we're reversing this transaction, or we're making some change, then that is what happens. It is majority rules. That's good if you only have a small number of bad actors that are trying to send a coin to one person and the same coin to another, because it means that they can't get through. They can only get that double spend through if they successfully gain 51% or more of the total network. So really, one of the interesting things about Bitcoin is they've never successfully had that 51% attack. They've never had enough people to try and attack the system in a coordinated way. The reason they were able to do that was because they have an incentive for each individual person. So in addition to having the full history of transactions and verify each transaction coming in, each node, each computer running the Bitcoin, running a Bitcoin node has the chance to get newly minted Bitcoin. So every block that's created, or every through every interval of time, your computer starts hashing away. It's trying to solve a cryptographic puzzle. And if it solves that cryptographic puzzle, it tells everyone else in the network, all the other nodes, hey, I have the answer to that puzzle. Those other nodes say, yes, that is the answer. And you are granted, I think now it's 12.5 new Bitcoin. That's, that comes out of its total supply. What this does is it's really clever because you have the chance to earn newly minted Bitcoin, you don't want other people to mint those newly minted Bitcoin. So you're in competition with each other. So you're not cooperating to game the system. You're not cooperating to get that 51% majority. And so that's the really beautiful thing about this, is it created a consensus algorithm that allows us to fully decentralize this database of money. Really what Bitcoin does is it converts greed into security. Because the humans just, the need to compete and be the one to get those coins is greater than the ability to coordinate to, get those coins through other means. So it really is quite an interesting little, that's why I say they solve this problem really gracefully, because they're using game theory and human psychology to maintain and increase the security of it, so that no one person can say, okay, now we're going to, triple the amount of Bitcoin in existence, for example.
Absolutely. Fascinating. It's interesting. So I can see already, I should say, that there's a tremendous amount of potential solution type effects to a lot of problems in the world through something like this. And as you said, I think one of the key elements there is, however we move into the future, if it's going to be positive, which we all hope it is, it has to be aware of and integrate with natural human behavioral patterns. There's this idea of trying to whiteboard the entire world so everybody's just a blank slate and then they just behave as you expect them to. Of course not. But that's really clever. And I can see a correlate within like a natural setting too, because in nature, there is competition in, say, the herd of animals, there's competition, but that competition sustains the strength of the herd too. And therefore everybody is helping keeping it together by their own efforts. And then, that's really clever. I just want to circle back to something for a second for my own interest. What was it was like a Japanese name that gets this credit for the white paper?
Yeah, Satoshi Nakamoto.
So that name doesn't mean anything though?
No, I mean, you look at Satoshi. Well, Satoshi is the richest person in the world now, because Bitcoin has become as valuable as it is. and Satoshi's wallet has enough Bitcoin to make them, the richest person in the world.
Huh.
So what's fascinating is no one has successfully been able to prove that they are Satoshi. And so far, those coins actually haven't really moved out of that wallet.
Oh, wow.
It's very interesting, the kind of history of it, because this entity, Satoshi Nakamoto, releases this white paper. He has some emails going back and forth with some crypto nerds. There is a subculture on the internet called cypherpunks that were all about like this libertarian. Let's create money. Let's have this total privacy, no governments kind of thing. Like really cryptography nerds that were trying to build like a new internet society. He emails back and forth with some of these people because they were the ones that had been previously trying to develop this kind of peer-to-peer digital cash. And then he just kind of goes silent. He goes dark, and hasn't really made any announcements since then. There was a person that they found whose name was Satoshi Nakamoto, and everybody thought for a while, this is it, but he was just kind of a guy who sat in his basement and liked to play with model trains, like not Satoshi Nakamoto. There's that email came out, an email from Satoshi said, I am not this guy. But I've heard that at that point, the email may have been compromised at that point. Point is, this person or entity or group of people have the most money in the history of the world and haven't really taken that. Like, I don't know about you, but I would not be able to stand not accessing all that money, right? Like, I'd like to think that I have pretty high ideals and I'd like to do things for the good of humanity, but I'd take the money. I would say, yes, I'm Satoshi, and here, give me all the yachts.
Yeah, give me all of the yachts, all of them. But that speaks to me to this person or persons already has enough money, they don't care.
Or they deliberately destroyed access to it, like when it was not super valuable.
Yeah.
They decided, like, for the good of this, they made a Satoshi sacrifice and said, maybe this becomes the most important, the next money in the world, but for the moment, while it's less than a penny per dollar, I'm just going to destroy access to it, because that's the only way I could see it. Or that person or persons is no longer with us. Maybe they died and passed away. There is at least one person who kind of fits that, where they were kind of a computer scientist in the cypherpunk movement, who passed away. But again, it's an interesting riddle within the cryptocurrency world. But I think it's better that Satoshi remains anonymous. I think the worst possible thing is for someone to come and say, yes, I am Satoshi, and this is what we're going to do now. One of its advantages is that it has no single leader.
That's what I keep coming back to in the bigger picture element of this, is that it is, as you say, decentralized. But before I jump into that too much, I just want to touch on also, so is as difficult as it is to kind of wrap your head around if you've never thought about it, all currency is abstract. All currency is a projection into the world to allow for currency exchange. Okay. Digital currencies are born out of the digital space, and that makes sense, because why not utilize the space to its maximum potential? Somewhere in there, there's some incredible genius level design elements here, because of the way that you talk about how it's set up and can sustain itself as being democratized, almost, I guess you could say. Do all the other cryptocurrencies work in the same framework, like Ethereum and such?
They have yes and no. They all have a consensus algorithm. They all have a way of ensuring that that no one person has the single source of truth. What Satoshi Nakamoto did was create this thing called the Nakamoto consensus. And that's what I was getting into with your computer is solving a puzzle. And if it solves that puzzle, it announces it. Everybody says, yes, you got it. That's great. Ethereum also uses that. It's slightly different, but that's called proof of work. What your computer is doing is it's proving that it's done the work to solve this puzzle. And that's where, and when you go down that rabbit hole, that's kind of the root of the big questions around, is Bitcoin environmentally unfriendly, and all this. The reason is that you get some very clever people that are like, okay, if I'm going to get 12 and a half new Bitcoin whenever a new block is created or whatever, what I'm going to do is I'm going to get like 1,000 computers, and all those computers are going to do is try to mine for this Bitcoin. They're just going to keep solving these puzzles. You start to scale up. It's from 1,000 computers to 10,000 to 100,000. And really what starts to happen is it's not so much the computers that are running, it's the amount of power that it takes to feed all of these computers that are trying to solve this, completely useless riddle, just so that they can get the Bitcoin. The economics work out so that you need like huge data center scale computers to reliably get enough Bitcoin, and your energy has to be cheap enough to turn a profit. For China, what that means is a lot of cheap or even stolen coal power, because coal is the cheapest power generation. And there was studies that came out that said, really looked into it and said, yeah, the scale of Bitcoin mining, at least in China, does put China's Paris Agreement commitments at risk. That these things do happen. And these weren't really super sanctioned by the Chinese government and all that. That's not so much of a problem now that China has completely banned Bitcoin and mining. They've banned Bitcoin like 6 or 7 times in its history. But the big news that came out this year was that they actually banned Bitcoin mining. And that was a really huge source of revenue for some people. That actually the majority of Bitcoin mining in the world was coming out of China. That's since kind of been distributed as, the Chinese government has cracked down on that behavior. But to circle back to this consensus algorithm, this way of doing it, it's not the only way to do it. And the other systems and what the industry has started doing, these new coins that have come out, especially in the last couple of years, is using a new kind of consensus algorithm called proof of stake. So instead of proof of work, proof of stake. And really what you're doing is you are staking some of the currency that you own. So if I own, so as an example, Ethereum doesn't have it yet, but it's moving to there. But one that does is called Cardano, the Cardano blockchain. And it uses proof of stake. And so if you have 10 Cardano, you can stake that Cardano, and it will you delegate it to a stake pool operator. And what this is doing is basically this person or this entity is verifying that the transactions are coming in, verifying that it's correct. And when it successfully verifies and when it is acting as a good citizen in this network, it is rewarded with new Cardano or new ADA that is distributed to everyone based on how much they put in. So that's a complicated way of saying if you stake 10 ADA, you'll start earning like 5% a year on that ADA by securing the network. It has a nice advantage of it doesn't have a lot of energy constraints. You don't need full data centers with coal power plants in order to secure the network. You're just getting everyone who wants to stake some of their things that's just sitting in a wallet anyways. Why not earn like 5% a year on that? So there's a couple others. It's one of the big things that is being investigated right now. There's a lot of different chains that are experimenting with things. There's like proof of history and these other things. But yeah, the main thing is that there has to be a consensus algorithm that allows you to fully decentralize it, because the power of this entire movement is rooted in that decentralized aspect.
Yeah, yeah, I hear that. And yeah, thank you for sharing this stuff because it's making me a lot more interested as well. Yeah, so I want to jump into maybe then how this relates to the real world economic dynamics. So a couple things stand out there that I think are really important to balance against this whole thing. Is like, one is this problem then of energy production and the use of it to confirm the value, I guess is a way to put it. But immediately I can tell that this type of currency would be, at least conceptually, a threat to national currencies. So as you know, and everyone knows, like power and money and corruption and all this stuff, it's everywhere. I heard too that there's countries that are going to be starting their own cryptocurrencies that are going to be a national cryptocurrency.
Yes.
I think Canada even talked about this. I'm not sure if they're doing anything. What would be the relationship ideally? Can you talk to the idea of a relationship between even national cryptocurrencies and these like non-nationally based independent ones? How that would work?
Yeah, so what you're describing is called a central bank digital currency. CBDC is what they're commonly referred to. China is by far and away the most advanced in terms of developing a CBDC, as a central bank digital currency, which is one of the reasons, that you get the sense that they're banning Bitcoin. They don't want other competition for their new digital currency. And it's also one of the reasons that other countries are actually investigating this. China or Canada is Canada, United States. Most of these countries are still in the research phase. They've put out a couple interesting papers, but nothing too adventurous yet. CBDCs, the central bank digital currencies, are well, first of all, they won't be decentralized. They have no need of decentralization. Their security comes from the state. The government is going to maintain the security of the thing. The consensus algorithm is you're going to be part of this country because you are part of this country. There's your consensus. So why would they want to do this? There's a couple complicated answers. I can't say that I'm a super expert on this, but I can tell you that there is some really concerning things that could result from a central bank digital currency, especially if you're thinking about it in context of China, which has a very authoritarian type government. Obviously, something like China has a social credit system where behavior that's deemed bad for the state is, bad for your ability to freely travel throughout the country, to get a job, all this stuff. With something like a central bank digital currency, you could hook that social credit score into your bank account. Right? So if you have done something that the government does not like, they could say, well, now you have 0 yuan. There you go.
Yeah.
That kind of, the other side of that is, for a country that is less authoritarian, but let's say a country like Canada that's going through a recession, and the central banks decide that what is really needed is monetary stimulus. They're going to give everyone, some amount of dollars, and that's going to stimulate the economy and get out of this recession faster. They've been saying that for about a decade. That's neither here nor there. We can get into that if you want. Here's the thing. Right now, the only method for them to stimulate the economy is through the banks. They have this complicated way of they set the rates for the banks to borrow out of, and these commercial banks are then going to distribute it or give loans to the population. With something like a central bank digital currency, the wallet you have, the account you have, is with the central bank directly. So if they want to stimulate the economy, they want to give everyone $100, they can just snap their fingers and your bank account now has $100 more. It cuts out that commercial bank middleman. So that is kind of one of the advantages. But it really is it does have those dangers of, well, if you get authoritarian or if things start getting that lack of decentralization really starts to become problematic as times start to get more stressful. And my thesis is things are going to get worse before they get any better in the current economic and climate conditions that we have in the world.
Yes. Yeah. Now to me, that's the crux of this, is how this is going to evolve in that relationship between the power structures that were to the newly formed potential economic engine that this creates, or economic routing pathways, or whatever you want to call it.
Yep.
So I've often thought that if the world was run by governments that I trusted and I really knew had the best interest of people, and like I really believe that, then I could see a lot of things being implemented that I wouldn't want to agree with now because I don't trust the government so much. And that idea of their ability to control things in the way that you're talking about with the social credit score in China and such, I don't want to give that an opportunity to develop at the current time. I would like a world where I could really look at the government and the financial world, trust them to have humanity's best interests at heart. But what does that even mean? So here's where my mind's going. Is okay, so a person like myself looks at this and goes, I like the idea of a decentralized currency because it gives me a sense, it could offer me a sense of freedom from a dependency on an entity that I don't actually trust. I still want to work with the government to make it better. I'm not trying to pull away from that context, but I see that now. If I were to have just an abstract number, say $100,000, and I have $100,000 in the bank, that's my life savings, and I put it into Bitcoin, that means that money's no longer in circulation in the economy as such normally, right? And so am I disconnecting my ability to provide a role in the economy as it is in that sense?
I would say no, for the same reason that if you take that $100,000 and you invest it in a stock, it's also not, removing from the economy. What the state is most interested in for most of us is its ability to collect its taxes. You're going to render under Caesar because Caesar's going to get his due. So the current state of the government to cryptocurrencies to whatever is most governments are treating most crypto as a security, which is a asset that grows in value over time, much like a stock. What that means is you can take that 100,000, invest it in Bitcoin. But if you want to take some of the gains back, let's say that, it doubles your money and you're saying, okay, I want that 100,000 back. So I'll have 100,000 Bitcoin and 100,000 in my bank account. Well, you're going to get hit with capital gains tax. And so the control structure that the governments have put in place is they're really focusing on the on-ramps and off-ramps into and out of crypto. You can do whatever you want in crypto, really, but if you want to come back, you want to take that money back one way or another, you're going to have to prove that you got it through legal means, that you didn't, steal somebody else's or whatever, and you're going to have to pay taxes on it. So on the onboarding ramp, in order to get that crypto, usually what you're going to do is you're going to go to exchange like Coinbase or something. And in order to sign up for Coinbase, you're going to have to complete something called KYC, know your customer. And this is going to be able to say, Coinbase is going to be able to prove to the government that says, yes, Luke bought this Bitcoin at this date, and we have all that. So that's the on-ramp. And then the off-ramp, obviously, is at tax time. They're going to take whatever the capital gains tax is for your particular region.
Yeah, and then if they do that, then at those points of exchange, they can get their tax revenue that they need from exchanging in general. Because I've seen businesses online mainly say that you can pay with Bitcoin now, and I was like, well, how is that going to work, right? But that still means, and this is a weird thing in the land of abstraction, is that there's like a currency within the country that isn't part of the country that you can use to pay for things.
Correct. Yeah, yeah. That kind of hits the nail on the head. Is that right now in our society, in our little tribe here on Earth, the global reserve currency is the U.S. dollar. Yeah. So for the past 100 years, we've basically lived in a society um, that is that has the U.S. dollar as the global reserve currency. Um, what we this started in First World War, Second World War, where the U.S. dollar essentially replaced the pound sterling, Britain's currency, as the global reserve. Um, for a number of reasons, we're seeing the end of that U.S. Dollar as the sole global reserve currency. America's power in that sense is starting to weaken compared to the rest of the world. That's not like a bad thing. That's not necessarily America becoming weaker. Really, it's a lot of the rest of the world becoming stronger. The effects of globalization really helped developing countries really develop their economies. Countries like China have become the factory of the world, and they have, a dollar that is strengthening relative to the U.S. dollar over the macro term, over the long scale. Um, what we're starting to see is the beginning of the end for the US dollar as the global reserve currency. There's a bunch of reasons for that. I kind of got into some of them. Another thing is, though, it actually doesn't suit America all that well anymore. The US dollar as reserve currency makes a lot of sense if you're fighting a Cold War with the Soviet Union. They needed a global dollar, global economic engine, because their strategy against the Soviet Union was to have a stronger global economy than them. That's no longer the case. Now it's a bunch of individual countries, and it's very expensive for the United States to maintain that US dollar. You think about the military presence that it needs to do. You think about just the sheer amount of money that you need to pump into the system in order to keep it going. It doesn't make sense in the current environment for a lot of reasons. So as we start to look towards the future, we're going to see not the US dollar become replaced by another global reserve currency, but likely what you're going to see is several reserve currencies. For some things, in some circumstances, you might use the Chinese yuan, or you might use the euro, or you might use the US dollar, or you might be using a cryptocurrency. Cryptocurrencies specifically, because it is trustless, because you don't have to trust any one person, it is really good to travel international lines where you don't have to deal with, okay, is this country legit? Is the rule of law there? If I sign a contract with someone in an African country, is that contract going to be honored? We have a system now, a decentralized system where that trust is guaranteed. If the conditions of that contract is met, then that contract is triggered. It is guaranteed by the blockchain. Now that gets into Ethereum and smart contracts. I don't think we'll have time to go into that today, but that's where a lot of the really fun, interesting things starts to come into play. But the point is, I think in the next dozen years, we're going to see further retractment of the US dollar, and we're going to see a lot more regional currencies at play, which I think actually benefits cryptocurrencies, because it actually acts as kind of a further abstraction on these monetary abstractions, and acts as lubrication between the yuan and the dollar and the euro and all these things. That's all speculation, but that's kind of where I see this macro landscape leading.
Yeah, well, that's part of one of the last elements that I wanted to discuss with today too, is like moving into the future. Nobody knows the future, But before I really jump into that one, even within the state of the world today, where it's there's a feeling of everything's chaotic these days. Everything is going in random directions, and it seems like the extremes are getting, well, I think they are getting more extreme in many ways. And so, you can look at certain principles of human behavior and go, okay, well, greed has always existed. The desire to consolidate one's power has always existed. There are people that are in power who are not morally the most high morally developed people. So there's going to be a sort of a metaphysical war of ideas about where to go and what ideology to follow and who's, and I see a lot of that. And I don't just mean with the economic world, I'm talking on a larger scale here. And one of the problems, I think, for the individual trying to decipher what's going on in the world is, where does the line between the real corruption and the real nasty bullshit and the real lying in the world, and then going into full-on crazy town of conspiracy assumptions? And I think that when you brought up the social credit system in China, it's a good example of something that exists, but is so far away from what most people think is even possible, that it's challenging to find where that really, like, what is really going on and where are these things really going in that sense. So what that would come to, I guess, in terms of the space is like, okay, so if you're in a situation where you had to, like, defeat an enemy, right? Like in a very, very, very symbolic representation, when they're most close to the end of their fight, they're going to lash out with the most vigor and violence. And these hegemonic social economic structures that have been going on in our society forever almost, they must be feeling the pinch right now in terms of this evolution, because I mean, just this conversation today has blown my mind, and just how beautiful that idea of decentralized currency could be, because it eliminates the ability for that consolidation of power into the wrong end. And it's incredible, actually. So anyways, where I'm trying to go with this is just like, how do we go in the future, recognizing this challenge of two possible sort of directions, and what can be done to kind of steer towards the one that's better for humanity overall, rather than just a few select people?
Well, I can tell you, I don't have the answer.
No, I'm sorry. Okay. Let me back up a moment. I don't expect you to be Nostradamus. That's not my point. I just mean just to explore that as an idea.
Yeah.
Because I've said this to a few of the people that have come on the podcast, but we are in a state of chaos. And there's an old saying, Chinese saying, to do with the idea that danger and opportunity are the same. And so there's danger in that chaos, but there's opportunity in it too. And so speak towards maybe the opportunity in that sense.
Yeah. I think it's things are likely going to get worse in general. The political divides that we've seen are, I believe a lot in, like, continuation. Like when I'm, looking at a stock or something, I think if it's, going up, the momentum's going to keep it going up. If it's going down, it's, probably going to keep going down. That continuation, that momentum matters. I think the momentum right now in the political world and the economic world is that things are generally getting worse, right? I don't think that's a crazy that's a hot take here in 2021 post-COVID, all this stuff. I think a lot of challenges we're going to see a lot of challenges to kind of the Western ideals of, privacy and liberty and all those things. A lot of those things that we've taken for granted as a culture, especially in the West, are going to be continually stressed. And I don't know if we've done a good job of defending the things that have already been tested. Take privacy, for example. It feels like, especially in the digital world, that nothing is private, that, your data is known, it's being sold to all sorts of people and entities. The governments freely spy on even within the West. That that they know who you are and they know what you're doing, kind of thing. I think it's a really hard question because, as you said, it's really easy to go from that to conspiracy theory, you know, the president is out to get you, to kind of crazy talk, right? And so really, for me personally, it's been, what I need to do is focus on my own health, mental health, personal health, all that kind of thing. I think in a world where everything is global, we lose sight of the local, and we lose sight of, if you're doing something that's benefiting the people you're with and the community that you're with on a local level, that is actually going to do good things on the global scale. If enough people are helping each other and strengthening the community, then those communities are going to be stronger in these global headwinds. So for me personally, it's been really, these are in crazy times, but find a sense of peace however you can, whatever that means to you, whatever you have to do it. Hopefully those are constructive things to you. You're not doing things that are ultimately negative for you in order to achieve that sense of calm and peace. But for me, I know that I used to live in Vancouver. I've moved away from Vancouver. I've made some pretty strong life changes, because as things have gotten more chaotic, I found I've needed to do more to get that sense of peace, and to get that sense of what I'm doing is calm for at least me. What you have to do, you have to be in the eye of the storm, because in the eye of the hurricane, it's calm, it's sunny ways. It's a crazy all around you, but your boat for the moment is safe.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's kind of, I don't know if that's exactly what you're asking or what, but that's what came to mind with the crisis versus opportunity. And the fact is, there is going to be opportunity. I mean,
Yeah.
you kind of have to dodge and weave, and you kind of have to really know what you're looking at and spend the time. But I think for me, it all comes down to the things that I'm really interested in, the things that I like to do as an enjoyment. Will be the authors of the opportunity that is available to me.
That's an interesting way to put it. Yeah. Well, of course, I agree with the basis of life being that you seek your life in a way that is sustaining a high level of health and internal peace and all the mental clarity. I think getting out of cities is definitely something that for a lot of, like, if you've never lived outside of the city and been closer to nature in that sense, it really makes a difference. And this gets into more of where because of my background, I have a little bit more, I feel, of comfortability talking about. But I can relate this to the Bitcoin or just cryptocurrency, actually. So we evolved these really complex nervous systems that are designed to respond to stimuli in the environment in many, many different ways. And you can divide those responses initially into two categorical things that really matter. One of them is the fight or flight thing, which is a fear response. And that is a stress response as well. And it will do sustained over long periods of time. It's definitely not good for you in any way. Then the other one is what I recently been sort of calling the social dynamic response, which is I want to interact with other people in a way that's friendly and positive, and positive is the right word. And this is something we develop largely with sharing food is a really good example of that, because you can see an animal like a lion pride, they share the kill in a certain way, but they still do it. Anyway, one of the main things that I think we need to do, this is just me speaking to, I'm not trying to claim to be telling anybody anything, but is to get some degree of separation between ourselves and concepts like authority and currency and whatnot, and look at them with the objective idea of what are they supposed to do, how are they supposed to work, and how do we interact with them in such a way that sustains the values that we really want to have in society. So from a bigger picture concept, we're talking about the importance of like the balance, I think, in terms of like large scale world issues and the individual's life, and where and how and why it's important, I should say, maybe is the best way to put it, why it's important that you as an individual sustain a sense of health and peace in your own life. And you'd mentioned, and I agreed with you, getting out of the city is one of these elements, getting closer to nature. But I was talking about the evolution of the nervous system and then the types of responses. So we have a response for socializing. That response requires trust in the community, and it requires good communication. So you need to be able to talk to each other and really understand and feel out each other in that sense. And then you need to trust that because all money is a form of trust in a way, because you have to trust that this currency will buy you the bread you need or whatever. And so I think that part of the thing that people, if we're going to go forward, and again, this is coming back to my own personal just interpretations, is to explore and actually conceptualize what our values actually are. What do we want as a value in society? Because one of the problems I see with the global space, the large scale global world, is that there's no real conception of what it matters overall, other than greedy sort of momentary gains, which obviously are not going to be helpful to the long run. So the crypto thing, then I can see literal ideological battle going on then between the people that understand the value of decentralizing the currency and giving everyone equal footing in that regard, and then the people that would want to try to take advantage of it for their own purposes. Probably not that they would state it in that exact way publicly, but that inclination being held back. And okay, so here's a question about that. Do you know of any real? I've heard about this from, like, nefarious sort of actors, maybe, but could the world governments get together and say no more Bitcoin, done, and it'll be over?
That's going to be the big fight in
Yeah.
probably the next couple of years, is what can they do? So one of the big resources that I use to really get an understanding of blockchain in general, it's a MIT course that was released on YouTube, MIT's Blockchain and Money. It was taught actually by the current head of the SEC, the Securities Exchange Commission, who's responsible for, enforcing securities law in the United States. And in one of the episodes, it's like 25-hour-long lectures on everything blockchain and money. And in one of them, he was talking about the regulatory question. And the way he framed it, I think, stuck with me the most, is governments have three options to choose from when approaching cryptocurrencies. They can choose a policy to isolate it, to regulate it, or to integrate it. China is an example of, they've isolated it. They've said, no, it's out of the system, it's illegal, it's banned. Countries like the United States are tending more towards the regulatory question. If they're going to regulate it, it's going to be part of the system. My general sense is they will likely have more success engaging a policy of regulation, because that's the easiest way to get, tax revenue from, the people from it. And my feeling is that the governments want taxes above all things else. Maybe I'm wrong there, but I think taxes are pretty important to, nation states. What I believe is that with regulation becomes the seed of actual integration. Like just how more and more of the economy started shifting towards the internet, just as more and more things started developing that are just internet based, where now the internet is literally the underpinning of our modern society. I think blockchain and distributed ledger technology provides that same kind of seed, where maybe they try and ban it. I don't know how easy that would be. I'd like to think that the people are in charge would try to be a bit more subtle and try to, kill it with compliance than, declare outright war. We'll see what comes to pass. But I think that if they choose to regulate it, if it becomes part of the system, that some of the natural advantages of having this trustless architecture and being able to guarantee certain things without having to trust in a person or entity, I think that naturally starts to eat into the current system, just because there's a natural advantage. one last thing to leave you with, and this is kind of on the bleeding edge of crypto. This is kind of the stuff that isn't even in the public consciousness yet. And it relates to that, talking about community and talking about being with people you trust. One of the big things that is happening kind of under the radar right now is this concept called a decentralized autonomous organization, a DAO, DAO. And a decentralized autonomous organization is essentially a community of people who share and invest in a token or a currency specific to that community. Now that's really interesting, because if you think in terms of like a charity, like this is a community that's going to fight cancer. That's the point of this community. They can actually create a token that is, it's a money with the specific point of fighting cancer. I think that's super powerful, and I think that's going to be one of the things that starts to eat away into corporations, because it's no longer one guy at the top. It's a group of people all headed, all pushing, all organizing behind the central thesis of whatever your token is. And baked within this decentralized autonomous organization is a method to actually vote on what you're doing, how you're doing it, and you're actually using that token as a voting mechanism. It's like you're putting up some of this money. So if you have 1,000 of this DAO token, you can actually vote on what you want to do and how you want to do it, and actually lead the community in where you want to go based on the voting methods using this money. So money as votes is kind of the things that hasn't even really broken the public consciousness. Right now we're still discussing if Bitcoin is going to zero or not. It's no, that there's some really interesting stuff that's still underway. But yeah, well, this concept of a digital autonomous organization is super fascinating.
Yeah, no, that I haven't heard of it, but as soon as you explain it, and especially thanks to the conversation we just had, where I got a framework of what's going on, not only does that make sense, but that feels like it might even be an evolutionary step forward for us as a species. There's a song by Machine Head, a metal band, and they just splice in quotes from Terence Mckenna. And Terence, I don't know if you know who Terence McKenna is.
I don't actually.
He was famous for promoting the idea that we evolved out of sort of proto-human monkey type creatures by largely ingesting magic mushrooms.
Oh, okay. Yeah.
So
I've heard that theory.
Yeah. So it's just little blurbs of his, but a few of those little blurbs in this song, and it's a cool song. They speak to the idea of people bringing forth new ideas that actually really revolutionize the world in a positive way. And so we just kicked off a memory of that. But so it's not the point is the song or anything, but okay. So that's really good. I'm ready to look towards things that work better than what's going on. I'm definitely interested in that. But again, coming from martial art background, maybe, I don't know, or just whatever is, it's not filling a vacant space. These new potential ways of exchange are competing against established power, and that established power, I don't believe, is likely to want to give up its power very easily. And the more you push it in the corner, the more likely it's going to act desperately. And so I think that this brings us back around to what you were saying about your individual life and your individual cultivation of peace and stuff, because I believe you know this, and I think for people listening, this isn't a really hard concept to get. But if you were to take on a challenge like that in some more direct symbolical way, you need to come from a place of healthy, peaceful calmness to really discern what is the best way to move forward with this type of thing. Because I had a guy on who tried running for political candidacy in the last election. He didn't get there, but he's got a lot of interesting ideas on these things. And he's really in touch with his community. This is back in Vancouver Island, where I grew up. Right. And he was talking about the seething, I guess is maybe a better word for it, discontent that's going along in the background of society right now, and how that will spill over into behaviors we don't want. And so to steer away from that dynamic of the rub turning into something really nasty, it's that individuals take enough care of themselves to sustain that sense of clarity in their own direction, because it is going to be a fight, I think, in at least some contexts. The new world, whatever that is, it's not going to emerge without some resistance, right? There's going to be some. So I think that's a great sort of circling to a beginning point and an end point, right? Because it all comes back to that. The only other thing I wanted to sort of touch on is if we were, and this is to do with, you just caught up this wonderful concept of this like community-based currency, right? Okay, so you had one for Vancouver. Okay, so Vancouver has one, and is it the theory that you would exchange that note of currency for a more generalized one if you went to Calgary or something? Or is that going to only have value in a local place?
Yeah, it's a good question. It kind of speaks to a more general sense of how cryptocurrency works. But basically, you would have a specific token for Vancouver. You could hold that, earn that, invest in that, whatever. But because this is all part of a networked marketplace, all of these currencies can have value discovered relative to each other, which means the Vancouver coin is worth $10 US. The Calgary coin is worth, $10 US. We now know that you can exchange one Vancouver coin for one Calgary coin, and it's going to be roughly the same.
Yeah.
This is writ large for everything, because everything is in a marketplace, and all of these things are feeding into each other. Everything has value relative to each other, so you can actually move in and out. And a lot of the clever day traders in the crypto space, what they'll do is they'll figure which of these coins are gaining relative to the other, move in there, move back and forth, whatever. It's not investment advice. It's probably you got to do whatever you want to do. But yeah, the fact is that what's interesting though is the utility of what that Vancouver coin might give you. Maybe you can only eat at a certain place with Vancouver coin, right? Like they won't accept Calgary coin there.
Mm-hmm.
So that's where kind of the future of money goes. It's not one currency to rule them all, but thousands of currencies that are loosely connected to each other through this global marketplace.
Yeah, and that's why that stuck out to me as a concept. Well, because as I sort of was saying, is I feel like this is at least potentially an evolutionary step forward in how we organize our economies, which is so important. It's so important. And what I like about it, this is why that idea attracted me, was first, I like that idea though, because as you said too, is if there's, what is this, kind of a cheesy saying, but act globally, think locally, or something to that end, right? The importance that I get that too, and that really plays into that. But at the same time, and I like this kind of thing, is I don't really understand what that would mean and how it would actually play out either. It's an idea of how to move forward that sounds like it's worth exploring, and with the right expert understanding behind it might be very beneficial. But I like the beauty of it being kind of like, I don't know how that would exactly work, but if it works, it could be amazing. So, keeping our heads clear about, and again, this is one of my main themes, is what are your values? What are your morals? Where do you place that? And then keeping those clear within the community you work with and moving forward from that. I mean, that really could do some revolutionarily wonderful things.
Yep.
I still, even after the last, year and a half of particular insanity, I still believe there's a better world possible for humanity and for all of us. And it always comes back to those principles, is you're in that sense. But so thank you very much for sharing this information, because I personally just learned a lot and gained a lot from that. And I'm that much more intrigued by this. And it's a little bit of a nice antidote to the doom and gloom kind of stuff that I have. Not that I don't, we need to explore those things too, because of course I call this thing the Dark Path Podcast, because the point is to go in to look at the things that haven't been looked at to try to make more sense of the world. But this is kind of a fun one to me because it's so new and it's so promising, yet not manifest to what it could be. And it's
it's what I like about it is it's not a utopian vision. It's it's starting off as how can people make a whole lot of money, which I think is very human. But I think there's also a path from let's make a lot of money to let's actually fundamentally change the world for better. But it takes a bit of a conversation in order to see how you square that circle, because it really is a bit of a paradigm shift in how you think about money and think about value and who has the control. And not control is a bad thing, but control is control is control. You need control in this world somehow, or else we're all going to go off the cliff. So
that's right.
It's one of the reasons why cryptocurrency has captivated me, is that it does offer some solutions, both kind of on the short term and on the long term. I'm in general an optimistic guy, and while I think that things are going to get worse before they get better, I also think that things are ultimately going to get better if we stand strong and live with whole intent.
Yes, I agree. I'm glad that I have a little bit more of an insight as to how this is going to potentially play out. And I'll be paying more attention to the crypto space going forward. I'd also like to give you an opportunity if there's any website or links you want to mention that you have, because I know you have a newsletter, I think.
Yep, I've been writing about cryptocurrency. It's really just been me recording my kind of dive into crypto. It's at jerkytreats.dev, which is hell of a URL, but that's the one I chose. And I try to release something every month, not necessarily just about crypto, whatever kind of piques my interest, but the main thing has been crypto in terms of the different narratives that are going on, how these things work, looking at it from different perspectives, like from a game developer point of view, since I'm a game developer by trade. I've been kind of looking like at how do you leverage the blockchain for games kind of thing. So yeah, that's kind of where I've been mainly focusing on. One of the things I'm doing right now is trying to learn how to actually work on the blockchain, like as an engineer, as a software engineer. Hopefully I'll be able to extend kind of my website to be more of a actually interacting with blockchain on a very real level. But that's just kind of the hobby. The day to day is just writing about the things that I find interesting.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, I would definitely be happy to have you come back on and update us with some more information as it develops, because it will.
Yep,
And
it always does.
yeah, and I hope everybody goes and checks out the newsletter and everything like that. And thank you again for your time, Justin.
Thank you so much for having me, Lucas. It's been a pleasure.
Absolutely.